All right, so Pete, I got to look at this question because it's a bit of a tongue twister for me, and I'm not an expert in this. So, how does the microcat catalyst in your process differ from the one that C&D used to market as the maximizer and put on all their 2-volt VRLA products back in like 2000? And what is the catalyst role in the final process?
Good question. That's a C&D maximizer. This is a microcat. That was the maximizer. This is just Teflon on the outside of this. This was the original catalyst that was in these cells. They put the Teflon around it, I think to keep gases out. The drawback to that was, if you can see this, there's one sealed end. This is the same type of material that's used in a flame arrestor on a vented battery, pretty much. Maybe a little bit, but right. So all the gases can come in from all these directions except here. Now, if you get a battery, and remember, when gases recombine, they generate heat on this.
Right.
So these things could get very, very, very hot. They could get so hot that it would cause, things to melt. Bad things happen. Again, it never looked like that. I took the Teflon off this one. That was what they looked like inside the HD cells. When we went to Philadelphia Scientific and asked them to make one that would fit other brand cells, they had exclusive with C&D for a period.
Of course, you deal with plastic as opposed to...
Yep, exactly. So when they come out with this, you've got this, the gasket can only go in through here now. And there's filters in there to filter out the hydrogen sulfide. You could have all the gas in the world. Only so much can get through the door.
Sure.
Whereas here, the door is closed, but you can come through everywhere else. So this could recombine a lot more gases and generate a lot more heat. This is a way of controlling that. This is that. Later on, I'll show you a whole array of all the ones that fit all different types of cells, and I'll show you the original prototypes for these. But the amount of material in there is identical. And if you took and break this apart and pop that out and you put them on a little thing, there's just little, the little pieces of material in there. They both do the exact same thing. The goal is to restrict or rob or keep some of the hydrogen from getting the negative to depolarize it. And one thing that happened years ago, those of you that can remember seeing the positive pulse push up, what's happening in there, this is not the exact number, but let's say you're floating your battery at 2.25, just for this example.
That's the golden, this is
close enough
spot,
at
right?
77, right? And this is not the right scientific number, but just for this. If in a vented battery, you stick a reference electrode in there and you measure over and say, okay, I'm getting 1.25 volts to my positive, I'm getting a -1 to my negative, I got 2.25 volts differential. The same thing here, let's say. Of course, it's tougher to do it. You got to do it in the lab.
Right.
But the same thing. Well, what happens as you depolarize that negative, well, that excess voltage has to go somewhere. So it's going on to the positive. That's why you see the positives growing right out of the cells. They're being way overcharged. Force feed them like me, and I can't get rid of this weight. I need to be depolarized.
Tell me, Pete.
So I need to be depolarized on my negative.
There you go.
Or I need polarization on my negative.
Pat will take care of it.
Some more water in there.
Yeah, that's it. But the problem is more water isn't always the answer. That's where some people that have tried this, it wasn't successful. And we learned the hard way. How do you think we learned this stuff? I'm no genius, but Jesus, don't do that too many times.
Well, that was true also in the flooded cells. I mean, if you saw some crystalline growth on the positive plate, you knew the battery was being undercharged, but it had all the water in the world. So
not going to do anything.
And then those they usually ended up, if everything was balanced and the voltages were right, then you then add a chemical depolarizer like chloropotassic acid.
Yep.
Or something.
Every manufacturer has it. Some have it in pill forms.
Right.
I liked it from way back Johnson Controls because actually we get a dropper and you could really fine tune that.
Drops, right.
Yep. So many drops, and it's amazing how fast it would happen. But back to that, it recombines gases. It helps keep the negatives properly charged which keeps you from overcharging your positives. It also keeps the flow current from increasing. You know, and by
So it's preventing a lot of the things that cause
Yep.
the dehydration of the battery.
yep,
and ultimately thermal runaway.
Okay.
yes, and ultimately stops thermal runaway.
Was to people in the field in telecom, if they've got a cell site, they're not the code definition confined space, but they're closed spaces, one door, that sort of thing. And if they respond to a high temp alarm that they're seeing remotely and go in there, and they're coming in on a thermal runaway condition, there could be quite a bit of hydrogen sulfide in the room, which is a toxic gas, and so they're expected to leave the room and do some things external to try and do that voltage. And then there's a mistake that commonly happens when they bring in one of these environmental companies and they come in and put their little meter in there and they tell the technician, well, you've been exposed to carbon monoxide, you got to go to the hospital, you got to do this and that.
You got to file for your disability.
Yeah. What's really going on is a lot of those meters don't read hydrogen sulfide, and so. But I don't want to get too much into that, other than it wreaks a lot of havoc for the telephone. Whoever's using the battery, whether it's a telecom or a utility. So thermal runaway is a really good thing to avoid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hence the catalyst.
On that. Well, it's not just gas, but on that, everybody used to believe that thermal runaway came without warning.
Right.
It just came out of nowhere. I did a paper years ago. I said, that's a bunch of crap. It's always told us it was coming. We just didn't know how to see it.
Right.
And you cannot have a thermal runaway unless you have dry out, excess current going in there
overcharge.
that makes the battery hot enough inside that it can't dissipate the heat externally. So by keeping it properly saturated, you can do that. You also, I'm going to go on a story, and I don't mean to be self-promotional, but
That's what you got to be for this.
The reason we also will have it, I guess you call it, it's not in our guarantee that we'll maintain your improvement in the IOVR. We have a thing called a BEM, and all that is a little box that monitors just 4 things. And you can never have thermal runaway. It always warns you beforehand. It monitors the overall voltage, and overall voltage is related to ambient temperature, or really related to the temperature inside the cell. If you have a temp, and it monitors overall voltage, the current to within parts of an amp, a tenth of an amp or more, or close to that, and just one cell in the battery, and the ambient. Well, if your current is going up, and then your cell starts to go up as compared to the ambient, if your cell is more than a degree or 2 maybe above, you got something happening. Well, you're going to see that current. You can't not have it. So it's always been there, and that was one of the things I said to Dave Fader. We didn't know. I love Dave. We didn't know. And it makes such sense. Nobody thought about that the current was a real.
So you put something on there to monitor that to
Yep, and we just put it on the battery, and it just sends out. You can't go into it. You can't pull it. It just sends out, and then it alerts. You can do text alert, all sorts of stuff. Comes to the server, but because of thermal runaway, and it's actually really for us. It's a maintenance enhancer.
Okay.
You know?
Well, I can't say who or where, but I know of a site where conditions got to where, how do I say this? Somebody burned their hand on the doorknob and knew something was going wrong.
That's hot.
Yeah, that's a good warning.
Yeah. So they called the fire department, who thank goodness handled it judiciously rather than just axe their way in. But it can get ugly.
Yeah.